Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole. Normally on this program, I'm bringing people on who share these bursts of inspiration and creativity about the lives that they're living and the things that they're able to accomplish. And actually, we're going to be doing that today too. But also, we will be talking about a very serious topic. We have all been rattled by the uh, outcome of the Supreme Court reversing Roe v. Wade. And in being rattled, so many of us are trying to figure out, what does it mean? What happens in the future? How are women going to remain empowered? What happens to communities? There are so many questions. And as I've been thinking about these very serious questions, I thought about who would be great to bring on to talk to us about this. And the person who came to mind immediately is a woman named Lauren Leader. She founded an organization called All In Together, which really looks at strategic ways to empower women across this country and beyond. She's been working in the empowerment space for a very long time, totally committed to figuring out how we can make change for the best for all of us in our community, but especially for women. And so she's been really busy. We were going to talk to her a couple days ago, and she was going to the White House. So we had to pause. What a great reason to have to pause, right? Anyhow, please join me in welcoming my dear friend, Lauren Leader.
Hi, Harriet. You know that the only person in the world that could get me away from a conversation with you would be the Vice President of the United States. So please know that I regret that I could not be with you a week ago. But
Hey,
thank
let
you
me
for
tell you
thank you
that's
for
okay.
letting my excuse be a passing one.
That is such a great excuse, I must say. And I love the fact that you are having an audience with the vice president. And many people listening probably know you because you are all over the media, but very often a guest on Morning Joe on MSNBC, where really smart conversation about politics and culture occur. So, Lauren, you know, you know my daughter. One
I
day
do.
she's
My
about to go away to
beautiful Carrie Montague is going to college.
she's going to college, and she's going to college in Wisconsin. And she walked into the room on that fateful day, and the news was on. And we were talking about something else, and she says, "Mommy, Wisconsin." I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "Wisconsin is one of the 7 states that instantly uh, said no, since Roe v. Wade was overturned,
Yeah.
that there would be no more. It's not even just abortion; it's all kinds of care that has ended instantly. And not that we are hoping in any way that she would be in a predicament where she might need that choice, but to have the choice. And she's like, I'm going somewhere that seems so welcoming, and now I don't know how welcoming it is. As a young woman looking at, you know, this is 50 years of this kind of freedom of choice that women have had, and now it has just been snatched away. So I want to start with, what do we tell our daughters, the young women in our lives who have had agency for so long? And in many places, it's just simply stripped away.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so much to that. And, it's a very real issue. And for someone like your daughter and all of the students who are going to go to this pretty progressive school in this state that is so regressive when it comes to this, but this is true all over the country, right? We're going to have 26 states with virtually total bans on abortion, within a matter of months. And like with so many things, what we activists have always said is that where this will harm the most are those who do not have the means and the resources to cross state lines, women who work hourly wages, who don't get paid time off, who are too poor to travel thousands of miles. And then, of course, the fear, to your very good point, that other kinds of basic healthcare will be under threat. And I think this is what is, really deeply concerning, and is all of the other kinds of healthcare that doctors now feel they cannot do because of this. And that's not just like in the case of an emergency like an ectopic pregnancy. It's also things like IVF and that are so mainstream and so part of our daily lives that would be politicized and removed from the decisions between us and our doctors and put into the hands of mostly unrepresentative lawmakers. And to the point of a state like Wisconsin, where, and really in many of the states where you see these trigger bans, the reality is that those state legislatures, which now have outsized power, because that is ultimately what the courts did, right? They handed the power to regulate abortion back to the states. Most Americans have not paid attention to state government, to state politics. It's like not a thing we notice. And in a lot of places around the country, people run unopposed, and those state legislatures are not even representative. I mean, there's only one state legislature in the country that even has 50% women. That's Nevada. But most state legislatures, most of them are like 30% or less. And when you actually look at how the representation of state legislatures line up against the populations of those states, they're often not representative. Just as an example, in Texas, the state legislature, more than a third of the state legislature was seated in the last term, having had zero opposition running against them. The same thing is true in Florida. Like 30% of the seats in Florida, not a single Democrat ran against a third of those Republican seats. So it's not representative. And I think, look, for young people, there's a few things that have happened here. In our lifetimes, Harriette, in our lifetimes and beyond, we have never seen a revocation of individual rights and freedoms. We haven't. Since the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, we've seen really nothing but an expansion of rights.
That's true.
Gay rights, women's rights, et cetera. Even, by the way, the day before the Dobbs decision, gun rights, which expanded individual freedom for gun owners, expanded the day before the Dobbs decision. So there is a kind of shock, I think, that is still palpable for people that we would go backwards. So I think, for young people, this is a lifetime fight, but the fact is that we also, it's not our fault, those of us who support these issues, but we also, there's a lot that we allowed to happen. We have not been paying attention to local politics. And I think a lot of Americans took these things for granted and just never believed it was possible that it would be over.
You've said so many things. I want to break down a few of them. My daughter probably won't like that I keep talking about her, but we are.
Yeah.
But just thinking,
we can talk about my daughters too. So
I know you can. So I think I've been taking her to vote with me since she was born, so that now she can vote. And paying attention to local politics is something we do, but honestly, I'm sure I could do even better, even though I do pay attention. But it reminds me, especially with college students and those who go away, maybe she should vote in Wisconsin, because that's a place where her vote may count more than in New York City and New York State. These are conversations to be had that we didn't have before. And so I'll say, for anyone who's in a similar position to me, that it could be a really good idea if your child is going somewhere that may not share as many values as where you live. Okay, maybe that's a good place for that person to vote, because we take a lot of things for granted if we live in a place that generally shares our values. So there's that. Then I want to tell you something, Lauren, that was really disturbing that I discovered in just doing research about birth control and, again, preparing a young person to go away. And what should we as parents think about? What should young adults think about as they are walking into their lives? In New York City, it's not the easiest thing to get a medical facility to give you birth control. Mm-hmm. That was shocking to me. In New York City, one of the most liberal places in the planet. So I think there is a repercussion even affecting so-called liberal locales because of
Right.
this law. What can you explain?
Well,
Why
look,
would that
in most
be?
countries, birth control is available over the counter. So
Right.
this is one of actually there's a famous, it's one of my favorite, like if you need a good like laugh till you cry, Amy Schumer did this awesome shtick when she had her show Inside Amy Schumer where she like goes out trying to get birth control. And like she literally has to have like 50 conversations with 50 different people. And she goes to like 100 places. And she finally goes to the pharmacy and she's standing online and she's about to order her birth control. And like a 14-year-old boy walks up to the counter and says, "Can I have a gun?" And they put the gun down and slide it to him. And she's still trying to get her
Uh,
birth control. I mean, it's laugh till you cry, and only Amy Schumer could do that, but it's not that wrong. Look, I think a few things. The over the counter birth control, I think I am really hopeful is something that the FDA is going to get really serious about.
yeah,
There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to have access to contraceptive care, and that would go a long way. If I had a daughter, listen, whatever you decide to do, but if I had a daughter who was going to school in a state with an abortion ban, I'd be sending her off with, a bunch of boxes of Plan B, which is accessible in this state, in New York, where we live. It should be accessible nationally because the FDA has approved it as a drug, but this is going to be a fight. And there will be pharmacies that won't carry it in places like Wisconsin and Oklahoma and Texas. It will be more difficult. But I would 100% be packing the like 6-pack of Plan Bs for my daughter going off to college. And by the way, if not for her, then for one of her friends. And, you
right,
know, I think we are, look, Harriet, the truth is, we are only beginning to understand. It has been 4 weeks. It has been
right.
4 weeks since this happened.
That's
We
right.
cannot even begin to understand what the ripple effect is going to feel like, right? We're starting to see some of these individual cases, like this horrible politicized story about this 10-year-old girl who, was raped and had to cross state lines. And last night, the doctor that did her abortion went on national television. Good for her, to stand up for what is right in this case. So, but we're barely beginning to understand it. What happens with IVF, what happens with birth control, what happens with all of these other things that we've all taken for granted, we will see. I don't think it's a particularly pretty picture ahead, but the reality is that the only answer now is political, and that the
Right,
way forward on this issue is through the ballot box. Um, there must be the stakes for the midterm elections this year. Americans don't really look at this stuff very seriously. We don't take it as presidentials get all the attention. The stakes for our midterm elections have never been higher if you are someone who cares about access to healthcare. I mean, if Democrats lose the Senate or the House or both, like it is a whole other world of hurt. And that is important. So people need to try on. I will say that I think I love what you said about getting kids to register to vote where they go to school. And there are lots of organizations that will be on campuses this fall getting kids to do
yes,
that. Super important. The youth vote has enormous power in this country. Enormous power. I mean, they had a huge impact on the 2020 election, but they got to turn out. And I 100% agree with you about them voting where they go to school. I mean, you're a resident in that state for 4 years. You should be voting where you
yes,
go to school.
yes. And we learned when we went to orientation, Lauren, that they have a whole setup ready for students to be able to get the proper ID that they need in order to register to vote. I want to go back to one other point that I made, but I want everybody listening to consider this. If you have young children, so way before voting age, take them with you to vote now. Literally, I brought my daughter from the moment she was born. Every election, we have not missed an election. When she was old enough, I had her. If you had to pull something, she pulled it. If she had to fill in the with the pencil, she
Mhm.
filled it in with the pencil. And we talked about who was running and what the issues were in advance. And I cannot impress upon you enough, if you develop the discipline with your children now, when it comes time for them to vote, it'll just be a thing that we do. This is part of life, right?
And maybe they'll do even more. I mean, it's remarkable to me, like of all the women that I know lots of women across the country at every level, and they all say the same thing, that it was that a parent that their household was politically active, that somebody took them to knock on doors on behalf of a candidate that they cared about, that they showed up at town hall meetings in their community. All of those things matter. And, I just want to like take a moment though in this conversation to really acknowledge Black women, because, Black women have been the backbone of American democracy and have shown up to ensure the stability of our system for generations. And they deserve enormous credit, because the fact is that Black women have shown up, they have brought their families, they have gotten their churches to the polls, they have turned out their communities. And white women have a in that way, and I think that is, and ultimately Black women are going to carry the heaviest burden in this post Roe world. It is going to be women of color, um, underrepresented women that are going to face the deepest consequences. And not for nothing, it's also with Black women also facing a huge maternal health crisis, and so the stakes are so high for Black women having children, right? And the together. So, I want to just acknowledge the lifetimes of work that Black women do and have done, continue to do in this country. And, we all need to step up and pull with them.
Hey, you guys, you are listening to Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole here on WBAI in New York City. That's 99.5 FM and WBAI.org everywhere. So you can listen to it no matter where you are. Right now, we're having a very serious, real conversation with my friend Lauren Leader, who runs the organization that she founded, All In Together, that is focused on empowering women and really getting involved in the political system so that we can put a stake in the ground and make sure that our voices are heard. Lauren, I want to go back to another thing that you mentioned when you were talking about these states. The trigger, is it the trigger? What did you call it?
Ban. There were a bunch of legislatures that passed laws that said the minute that Roe v. Wade was overturned, that they would automatically ban abortion in those states.
Yes. So there's a young woman in her early 20s who works with me who lives in Oklahoma, young white woman. And she was distraught, like so many others, the very next day, and said that, because Oklahoma was one of those trigger bans, and she said that she knew several women who had appointments and instantly no longer had appointments, and who didn't have money, because you mentioned it's going to hurt the people who don't have the resources to get on a plane and go somewhere else. And so now what they're doing is raising money, saving money, so that they can go to this other place and possibly pay more, because maybe their insurance doesn't cover in the way that some others might. And meanwhile, the clock is ticking. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the despair that I heard in her for her friends was palpable. And I know that people have lots of emotions around abortion. We certainly are. No one I know would recommend abortion as birth control. And yet, what we also know is that the folks who have overturned Roe v. Wade and those who believe in pro-life to any, with no exceptions, are not also saying, when that child is born, we will help you take care of it.
That's right.
When that child is born, we will do whatever is necessary to ensure a good quality of life. And so it's just lopsided, unfair. And then here are all of these women in this precarious position.
Yeah.
What
it's horrendous. I mean, listen, and Harriette, I'm an adoptive parent. So yes. Like I'll say a few things. One is that I am deeply empathetic and understanding of those who take a moral pro-life position. Like I have a diverse board that includes a number of pro-life women in my organization, because we're nonpartisan. And so we don't all agree. On the other hand, for the women that are being forced to have babies, and again, to the point of like, what does it mean to be pro-life? Whose life are you pro? And clearly the mothers' lives are less important to a lot of these lawmakers, especially where they're making no exceptions. But I think, look, I bring this point up about myself being an adoptive parent because I saw firsthand what the women, the amazing women who gave birth to my children, were living through. And one of my Stella's birth mother was living in a trailer. She was so poor that she needed donations of toilet paper from her church because you can't buy that with food stamps. You can't buy soap or household goods, and so she relied on a church to donate those, just feeding herself during her pregnancy because she was going to go through with this adoption. I was able to support her, but the other my younger daughter Serena's birth mother, who worked part-time at a Pizza Hut and already has a child, and like what she went through just to get to the point of giving up the child for adoption. There is no help, there is no support, there are no resources, and what we are inflicting on poor women is inhumane. And ultimately, what we are then inflicting on children who may be born into families that cannot care for them is inhumane. Our foster system is broken. My oldest daughter, Chantal, who you've not met yet, Harriet, but I hope you'll meet her soon, was in the foster system in Massachusetts. They age out of the foster system. So, and the foster system is broken in this country. So, this is the challenge that is ahead, which is, look, it's very easy to despair and to feel like there's nothing we can do. That's wrong. Like, we own this system. And it is ultimately up to us to hold our leaders accountable, to stand up and speak up for those that don't have a voice and for ourselves, and to work our butts off to change it. And as much as we could talk all day about the challenges in our democracy, the things that aren't working well, but the reality is that our votes do matter, that we can show up at the polls, that we can support organizations that are supporting women, like these women that you just mentioned, who don't have the resources, the means to get across state lines. But we need to be holding these leaders accountable for the consequences of their actions. And they need to understand that. And that's part of what we do at All In Together, is we teach women how to have a voice, how to speak up, how to get involved, how to call their member of Congress, call their local elected officials, tell them what they think. That stuff really does matter in our system.
So again, there's so much to chew on. I'm going to go backwards and then forward. So first of all, thank you for sharing so transparently about your family. I think it's helpful for people who are listening to know, again, this issue of Roe v. Wade is so volatile, and there's no simple answer to anything. And you have just described welcoming beautiful children into your family whose mothers were unable to take care of them for whatever the reasons are. Thank God you were able to do that. And how many young people do not have that blessing of having someone like you take them in, and then what happens to their lives. This is something that somehow we need to get the rest of the country to really see.
Well, you know what, can I just say one thing about that? Because I think you're right that it is a divisive issue. However, one thing that I hope people will understand from what has happened is that actually most Americans agree about this.
Right.
So what's really frustrating about this, I mean, one of the many things that's very frustrating about this decision is how unrepresentative it is. Mm-hmm. So we had a Supreme Court with a majority that was appointed by in illegitimate means, right? The seat that was legitimately Barack Obama's seat, which was essentially stolen by Mitch McConnell. Another seat that was filled hypocritically, even closer to the election. And then two other seats that were filled really under false pretenses because they died in their confirmation hearings. So we have this really illegitimate set of circumstances in the Supreme Court that is empowering a very, very small number of people to make decisions for the majority. And then you have, as I mentioned before, these states that have mostly unrepresentative state legislatures passing laws that most of their own citizens, and by the way, even in the Republican Party, a majority of Republicans do not support outright bans on abortion with no exceptions for the life of the mother, rape, and incest. But I say this because I think it's important that we understand that actually there is not that much divisiveness around this issue. Most Americans actually agree on this. 70% of Americans wanted to see the codification of Roe remain. That's not a divisive issue. And it's similar on guns, right? Where you have like 80, 90% of Americans, including gun owners, that support, common sense background checks, that, want to see the assault weapons ban go through. So Americans are remarkably in agreement on a bunch of stuff that we have been told are these like deeply divisive issues. They're not that divisive. We mostly agree. The issue is that our political system, we are not leveraging that collective power to make sure that the political system actually reflects the will of the people. And that's the work to do. But I think it's important because we are getting fed, like, is America divided? Yes, there's no question. There are some very deep political divisions. We are in some ways more divided than we've been in the last 50 years. Not ever. We had a civil war. We're not as divided as we were before the Civil War. Let's put it in context. But like by constantly feeding us this narrative that we're hopelessly divided, it actually is very disempowering. And the fact is that we mostly agree, actually, on a lot of these big issues. And I think that's important. Most of us agree with each other on these things.
That's important and very interesting that a lot of people don't realize that. That's all part of an odd media play, as we know. What is said 1,000 times may not be true.
Yeah.
But when it's the loudest voice, you often don't recognize it. You mentioned that a key thing that your organization, All In Together, does is to educate about how to get involved in the political process. And I'd like for you to talk a little bit about that, because as I describe what I do with my daughter, I know that a lot of young people are not paying attention, do not feel that voting is one step, but there are lots of things that need to be done, that just don't feel like this is for them now. Maybe I'll get involved with that when I'm older. How do you motivate people who aren't paying attention?
Yeah. So that was like the first thing that's like the first and main thing we are always focused on, is trying to show people a path to progress and why it matters. I'll say something about young people, and then I will explain a little bit more about what we do. But there's actually really interesting stuff going on in terms of the activism of young Americans right now. And I'm fascinated by it because I think it's really cool. First of all, a lot of the movements around the country towards unionizing, so the union votes at Amazon and in the Starbucks, and there's a big union movement in California around fast food workers. A lot of that unionization is being driven by young people, like under 30 and heavily female, by the way. So most of the leaders of most of these like unionizing movements are women. There's a couple of very notable examples, like the guys in New York who did the Amazon vote, but like it's mostly young women. And then the climate movement in this country, heavily driven by young people who see this as the existential threat that it is. Where it breaks down, so you've got on the one hand like this like amazing passion and activism, right? You think about the people that turned out in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. Like, it was young people that organized those marches in every community in America. I mean, there were marches down the street. You were there in Bridgehampton and like everywhere you can't even imagine.
Right. And all over the world.
All over the world. And that was all young people. So what's really wonderful in this world of today is that I think Gen Z and Gen Y to a slightly lesser degree, but for sure Gen Z is fired up and they are ready to fight on a bunch of things. The problem is they don't always see the political process as the right way to fight. And part of the reason is because what they tell us is that they're very frustrated at the process, right? They elect Democrats mostly, they're overwhelmingly left. But then they feel that Democrats don't actually come through and do what they elected them to do, right? They're not passing climate bills. They're not as, progressive and frankly not getting things done the way that they want to. And that's been turning them off. But I think that this Dobbs issue, and especially the fact that it then potentially threatens gay marriage and other issues, is like the galvanizing issue for younger Americans. And when we polled it just a few weeks ago, we found that it was like a 26-point increase in the commitment of especially younger women, to turn out at the polls in November. So that's the thing, is that there is all this passion and activism. They just don't necessarily see the political side. So that's what we have to change. And the way that we really do it is we try to make it accessible. and show people that like it can be productive. It's not all the stuff you see on CNN or MSNBC, that it's in your backyard. Getting to know your local electeds, showing up at a town board meeting in your community. These are all things that are like super easy and accessible. And when you get a taste of it and you start to see like, oh, I can be heard, it does make a difference. Someone's listening to me. I can pick up the phone and someone's going to answer it. It like builds courage and it shows people a path. And that's been really successful for us. The other thing is community. And I think, having friends and other women or other folks that you relate to do the work with you is really so. But we have work to do in this country.
There's no question. Hey guys, you're listening to Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole here on WBAI in New York City. That's 99.5 FM and everywhere online at WBAI.org. I hope that as you are listening, you are recognizing the importance of this conversation. We are talking about human rights. We are talking about freedom in the country that purports to be the most free country in the world. And, in some ways it is, but in other ways, we have so much work to do. What I appreciate so much about WBAI is that for 62 years, this progressive radio station has been working hard 24/7 to tell the truth, to bring people on who can show us a window into what the truth is. And we know in the past few years, there have been so many things that have been shared with others that are far from true. Fake news is what 45 called it, and then created so much fake news. And so here we are in the aftermath of a lot. And we are looking to figure out how we can move forward, how we can encourage the fire, ignite the fire in those who need that to happen, and ignite the fire in us, because a lot of us are sitting back and not doing as much as we can. WBAI is here to support you. We need your support. You know that we're completely listener sponsored, and I invite all of you within earshot today to make a contribution today to our beloved radio station. It can be a one-time contribution, or you can become what is called a BAI buddy, where you make a monthly contribution. It can be of any size. No size is too small or too large. Hear me? Not too small or too large. So here's how you can make your contribution. You can call us at 212-209-2950. I'll repeat, 212-209-2950. You can also go online at give2, WBAI.org. Why does it matter? Just like Lauren is talking about every vote mattering, it matters to keep us on the air. And we don't accept ads from anyone. So it's literally listeners who keep us afloat, who keep us going. And, if you miss a month of making a contribution to WBAI, that could be the electricity turned off. For real, not exaggerating, because we are not a wealthy station in dollars. We're wealthy in content, and we need you to continue to support us. So again, the number 212-209-2950. Please call, give generously. We appreciate you and your support. So we're talking to Lauren Leader, who runs an incredible organization called All In Together. She has been on the front lines working to make sure, in particular, that women have a voice and that women feel empowered to pick up the baton and do the work that needs to be done to ensure today and the future will be good for all of us. So, Lauren, would you tell us about All In Together? How you started it, what the intention is, and what you're doing today.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Harriette. And so we started All In Together in 2014 because we saw that there was a real gap in the level of engagement and participation of women. At the time, the United States was 54th in the world for the political parity of women compared to as ordained by the World Economic Forum. Today we're about 30. We're 37th in 2022. So we've had some progress, but we're still far behind much of the world. And the idea was exactly what we've been talking about, to demystify the political process, to make it accessible and a positive experience for women who, really do want to do good in the world, who are more likely to volunteer and, make difference in their communities, but don't always see the political process as worth their time or as a good way to do that. And so we give women this sort of big opportunity to learn and to make choices for themselves about what matters to them, and to then get involved in whatever way works for their lives. And ultimately, we of course need more women running for office in this country, but we really need women just participating, and that participation matters. We're just talking about the sort of stories of people's lives and ensuring that our elected officials understand the consequences of their behavior. And that's the kind of thing that any woman can do, no matter who they are or where they come from. And that is to pick up the phone or to send an email to someone that represents them and make sure that they've heard their story, that they understand how what they're doing is affecting their lives. Because that actually really is how public policy gets made in this country. They're not always going to necessarily agree with you, but they are elected to represent you. And I think most Americans don't necessarily appreciate, in some ways, how accessible our system can be. But you just have to kind of demystify it for people, open the door, and then most women will walk through it. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them will. Because I think women understand that this is a universal truth. I think that most women want to, not all of them, but most women, want to make the world better for their families and for their children, and will take action if they're given the opportunity.
You mentioned something earlier about community and about doing this work together. And I think of, in the world of fitness, we often talk about accountability partners. If you have someone that you're going to walk with or go to the gym with, or even you may not be in the same place, but you check in using these electronic devices. Did you do your exercise today? I did mine.
Yeah.
I want you to talk a little bit about how you create community around these political issues, for those who may not have done it yet.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great example, actually. And you gave the example earlier of like bringing your kids to the polls with you. And I think a similar one is like calling up your friends and making sure they know when election day is. And did you know that it's this? I mean, in New York, for instance, we have this like totally wacky, weird new state election because the dates got moved, and like nobody really knows that it's coming up in August. It's August 23rd. For those who live in New York and want to remember, it's actually a really important election for the governor and for all these new congressional districts that just got written. It's very confusing. People don't know that. So like that's one really easy way to create community, is to see yourself as, just don't assume that anyone knows that it's election day, or that knows that what's coming up or what's on the ballot. We have to be willing to like talk about that. The other thing is like being willing to support each other in, taking political action, inviting friends to come along. Like I'm going to take a trip to my local officials, my state representative's office. Are you interested in coming? I'd love for you to meet her. We're going to have coffee at the diner next Thursday. Would you like to come? But I think that the bigger part of community, to your point, especially for women, is just encouraging each other and supporting one another in participating. And I think that's huge. It's part of why I think there's so many women engaged in like school boards and local education issues, because there is a community of moms often. And moms have been like a really powerful political force in this country. You think about some of the most effective political movements, things like that you wouldn't think about, like drunk driving, right?
Right.
Moms organized. The reason why the age for alcohol is 21 is because moms organized in the 1980s to change those laws. So, and we've got groups like Moms Demand that are working on gun violence issues. And so the point is that there's strength in numbers. And that's always true in a democracy, but it's especially true, I think, for women, and frankly, for all underrepresented folks who may not feel comfortable speaking up on their own. And that community in politics is very, very powerful.
I work with an organization. I'm a senior fellow with an organization called encore.org that focuses on what they call co-generational engagement, which is really intentionally bringing people together who are representative of different ages and stages in life. And I moderated a discussion a few months ago about climate change that had very young people, teenagers, who have been on the front lines of waving the flag for paying attention to our climate and looking to save it, along with folks who've been in this game for a long time. And they were figuring out ways that they can work together and really join forces rather than, sometimes there's friction around, well, this is what I think and this is what you think. And sometimes the more senior people feel like they know better because they are more senior.
Mm.
And so I'm wondering about generational, co-generational ideas that you might have that could get younger people working with older people,
Mm.
because those combined efforts feel like they could have a tremendous impact. And I'm sure some are happening already, but for folks listening who may want to get involved and, engage the people in their community who might be from a different age group, how do you see that working?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, Harriet. And as we share a mutual appreciation for the Encore Fellowship, because my Chief Operating Officer, Isabel Gonzalez Whitaker, is an Encore Fellow with you, and she
She
loves the
sure
program
is.
too. So shout out to Isabel from the two of us.
Yes.
So I love this idea. It's funny, my mom, who is like, kill me if I said that. She is, but she doesn't like that I acknowledge that. Anyway, my mom, who's pushing 80, has like done a bunch of voter registration work on campuses around New York. And I think that's like so cool, is older folks like volunteering to go to college campuses and engage.
Oh, did we lose you?
Um, and I think like, but the other way around, look, I think we need to be listening more to younger voters. And I don't always agree. I think, a lot of the young people that I engage with are sometimes, um, I think, more uncompromising than I am comfortable with. And, but I really like on my team, we have some just extraordinary young women at All In Together. And I just learned so much from them. Like the level of, they're so extraordinarily well informed and like have some really interesting perspectives, especially on issues of equality. That has been really instructive for me as, and sometimes they like call me out for stuff that like for our generation, Harriet, was like acceptable. And, for their generation is clearly not. And it's a little bit of a like, okay, I'm really going to listen. It's humbling. It's humbling when you have somebody who's like 22 who's like calling you out, but we should be listening to them.
You know what? This is
The usual shows like a little bit, but like
it,
we definitely need to listen to them.
it's so true and so real. I recently was talking to some women in corporate America about the impact of millennials on the workplace. And I remember when millennials joined the workplace, which is now like 20 years ago, right? So millennials are not considered the new group anymore. But when millennials joined the workplace, there were a couple of things that were criticisms. Oh, they're not going to stick in a job for more than a year. They're so mouthy. They have so much to say. They're so pushy. They want this and that. And now, 20 years later, they have helped to revolutionize the way that people work. They have helped to create the ERGs, because no, people have to have a voice and you can't just be quiet. If you want people to stay, you better figure out how to have them stay, or else they are going to be moving, one year, rather than staying in a place for 20 years.
Well, and lady, Gen Zs are coming. I mean, Gen Z's got nothing on Gen Y. Like they are so, I mean, you've got one. And, Gen Z is like, it's remarkable their level of like self-confidence
Yes.
and willingness to speak up. And like they are unintimidated by anyone that's older or more senior or more perceived to be more powerful than them. And like, I think it's remarkable. And like the digital nativity of the way in which Gen Zs use media and social to like create cause and create community and then create movements. It's like unbelievable. And I mean, whatever it is, TikTok's coming for it. And like I'm kind of feeling old from this conversation. But they are amazing. I mean, Gen Z is like, they are kicking ass and taking names. And I cannot even imagine how they are going to change the workforce as they get into it. And watch out, because it is not how it was for us.
And,
But one thing I do worry about, and that I think is because I just did this discussion in Aspen about this, I worry a bit about the sort of absolutism that is really endemic of sort of the way that younger people think about politics, and that there's no tolerance for compromise or middle ground. It's like, and it's very for what I would consider to be very, very left. But the thing is that our system was not built for that. Like, our system is built for compromise
yes.
and incremental change. And that is one of the things that worries me, is that for so many younger Americans, they have like zero patience for that. And maybe the system needs to be changed, but right now it's the system we have, and you have to figure out how to operate successfully within it. And I happen to believe we often get better solutions when we find common ground with people that we don't agree with. But that's a very unpopular view among younger Americans.
And maybe, though, Lauren, the agitation that comes from the absolutism and the more centrism is what gets us to the next place. Maybe that's just part of that process. I want to remind folks that you're listening to Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole here on WBAI in New York City. That's 99.5 FM and everywhere online at WBAI.org. We are having a riveting conversation with Lauren Leader, founder of All In Together. We are talking politics, but so much more. Like, why does politics matter? Why should we care? Well, because we live in a culture that even offers us the opportunity to have a voice. There are some places in the world where you don't have a voice, where there's a leader who says this is how it has to be. And if you don't like it, you better shut up or you might not stay alive, right? So we are in a culture that, even though, well, as Lauren just said, built on compromise, but compromise is a much better thing than authoritarianism, right? So we get to have a voice, we get to have a vote, and it makes a difference. And I just want to say to everyone listening, we get to have a voice here on WBAI because we're on the air. And we're on the air because of your contributions. We do not accept ads. We accept donations from the people who love and respect us, and that's you. So if you would kindly make a donation today, we so appreciate it. You can call us at 212-209-2950. You can go online at give2wbai.org. It can be a contribution of any size. We know that dollars are tight. But also imagine if you didn't get to hear this conversation. Imagine if you didn't get to listen to people you trust, people who fill your heart and your soul with information that matters. That's what WBAI does. That's why we need you to contribute. So again, the number is 212-209-2950. You can go online at give2wbai.org. We encourage you to do so. You could do so right after this broadcast so you don't miss our conversation. But please do give. In these few minutes that we have left, Lauren, I would love for you to tell us what to do. Give us some marching orders.
Oh, and actually I got a wonderful question like that from a couple of men at a dinner the other night, which was like, what do the men need to do? And they need to fight with us for us, not just because it's relevant to them, but because it's our whole world. Look, I think every little bit counts. And even if you have 10 minutes, use that 10 minutes to find a pro-choice candidate running in a red state somewhere, and either volunteer to put in some time for them or give them some money, even if it's $5, get educated on where people stand. And I do think for us blue staters right now, putting some energy into supporting our fellow citizens in states that are less progressive. I think since we've been talking about the abortion discussion, like, I think making contributions to organizations that are not just providing abortion care, but also supporting folks getting across state lines. For those of us who work in larger companies, I think we should be asking our companies where they stand and making sure that they are willing. Many companies have come out to support paying for the cost of travel, but we need to make sure that that's happening, not just in the professional workforce, but also for the places where it matters, like fast food and franchise and hourly workers and folks who don't the kind, aren't necessarily of the professional class, but also, may work for big companies. So, I mean, but I think what I want people to take away is that even in this very complicated, when it looks like these huge intractable problems, every little bit counts. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's politics. You have to relish the incremental, and the incremental matters. Every little bit we do matters. Even getting one out of the polls, one person to register to vote, one person to write a
Lauren is frozen. Let's hope that, I know she's going to come back.
I'm here. I'm sorry.
There you are. Oh, good.
It all makes a difference, is what I was saying.
And so, Lauren, what do you do because you've been fighting this fight for a long time. What do you do when you get tired, when you get frustrated, when getting that one person to sign up, just you're exhausted? How do you keep your energy up?
Well, as you know, Harriette, I've had a 25-year meditation practice, and that meditation practice is fundamental, actually, to my ability to remain resilient and to have the perseverance and the inner resources to do what is almost every day a hard thing. And the second piece for me is faith and the belief that doing good will yield good results. Maybe not right this minute, but as Martin Luther King said, the long arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. But he was very specific that he said the long arc.
Right.
It is a long arc. And in his own lifetime, he did not see the progress that he dreamed of. And I think we have to remember that we own our democracy. It belongs to us, but it's the work of a lifetime. And doing good work is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so you have to build yourself. You have to regenerate, invest in the things that are uplifting and that give you strength and sustain you. I think that's why when you look at like the civil rights movement and other movements that have been successful, they were deeply faith driven. Yes, in that, like that faith in community was fundamental to sustaining one another in really hard times. So we all need to do that. Self-care is the word. I believe it. And we have to, but we cannot despair. And, hope is a radical act. Hope is a radical act.
I talk to some young people who are living in despair, who absolutely do not believe that their voice will make a difference. And I wonder, what can we say to people who have lost that faith, that hope, that there is a chance for them to make a difference? What do we say to them?
Well, history is an instructive teacher, but they're wrong, and it's just wrong. And, we have fought harder battles in this country, in the world. I think it's very inspiring to look to the leaders of past movements. We fought a civil war. It took 200 years for women to get the right to vote. It took, 250 plus years for Black America to get the right to vote. We had 400 years of slavery. These are long hauls, but the only way that we make change is by believing in its potential and by committing to it day after day after day. And that is, it is a choice. It is a choice to believe in our own human potential to do good in the world.
Well, I'm going to say amen to that, my sister.
Oh, yay.
There it is. Thank you so much, Lauren. It's always good to talk to you. Thank you for sharing your insights with us on this truly volatile topic. I hope everyone is leaving inspired by the things that you have had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm so grateful for you and your beautiful work on this show.
Thank you, dear. Wow. I hope that you learned as much as I did and that you really feel inspired to take action. Gather up a group of folks and make this a time when you work together to make a difference in our political process. We need each and every one of us to do that. So thank you for being with me today. And until next time, have a great day and make it count.